Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across Australia and the globe to train leaders, develop engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. And in 2020, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how Dunn Street can partner with you and one of your campaigns, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your favourite weekly centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're heading back over the States. We're doing this one a lot quicker today because yesterday was the the first presidential debate. And I've got my buddy Sam Schneidman, who you all know and love, who's been our US politics correspondent since October last year, a former Obama organiser and regional field director. He'll be on today's episode to unpack the train wreck, the shit show that was the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We'll talk about Trump's performance / behaviour. We'll talk about Joe Biden, the format, Chris Wallace, what this means in terms of the campaign and where we go from here. So that'll be Sam today unpacking the first presidential debate. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, or your favourite podcast app. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and give us a review. And for all the updates, just follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And as always, this episode was produced by Rebecca Connell. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Thursday morning in lockdown Melbourne, and it is less than 24 hours since the presidential debate finished, or began actually, in the United States. And joining me on the line, great to welcome back my good buddy and former Obama organiser and Democratic correspondent for Socially Democratic, Sam Schneidman. How are you?
I'm a little beleaguered, still trying to process the debate shit show from last night. But other than that, I'm doing quite well, Stephen. Thank you.
Are you ready for the what I think will become a therapy session? I haven't really had a chance to kind of speak with anyone about this debate since it's happened, and I've been looking forward to this. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot I need to get off my chest, and I think that may be the same case for your good self, particularly since it probably has a greater impact on your life than mine.
Well, I did see that, what was it? Was it Fairfax Media or the ABC yesterday demoted the premier's presser about COVID to air the debates live. So, I mean, at least, you guys certainly have a lot riding on this as well.
We do indeed.
Hopefully it was able to provide you with some comedic relief. I don't know if there was anything that... certainly there was nothing lighthearted about it, but maybe some of that sort of like a winsome smile you were able to get out of it.
And it's funny.
Like how you like see someone just going down, you're like, ooh.
Well, it's funny you say that because normally, yes, I do. Sometimes my disposition tends to see the comic side of even some of the most tragic moments. But even this, for me, was horrifying to watch and unravel before my eyes. So even I struggle to find some humour in it. But in the hours that have since elapsed and sort of checking out sort of comments and people's takes on Twitter, I've managed to have a bit of a giggle. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm keen to get your thoughts on the early stages of the debate. And if I can lead in by sharing my thoughts about it. I was looking forward to this debate because it's the first time that Trump was going to be in a room with someone who isn't in his inner circle, that he was going to be contested in his ideas, because rarely does he do any interviews with journalists that are putting him under any particular pressure. Probably that Jonathan Swan and Axios is probably the closest he got to it a while back. I was looking forward to it from that perspective, and I was also looking forward to it just because of the colour and the movement, and it is an opportunity where there is a contest in an election sense. So for me, the build-up kind of had a bit of a feel like it was like a sort of a big sporting game that was about to happen. You know, I was reading all the match reports, how each team was going to attack and what their game plan was going to be, what the strategy was going to be. And then the game starts, so the debate starts, and within the opening sort of 5 minutes, in which Trump is completely ignoring the debate rules and ignoring the moderator and just shouting over the top of Joe Biden, it felt like I was watching a game where your opponent has just completely jettisoned the game plan that you were expecting. And, you know, when you've watched some of those games, maybe it's a Super Bowl or it's an ALCS or an LCS or a Stanley Cup or a Cup final or something, and you're so invested in it, but your opponent is just coming at you at 100 miles an hour, and it's you can't cope with it. I
think probably a better analogy would be like wrestling, like not the Olympic style wrestling, the freak show like WWE type wrestling, where you've got someone who's like going with the plot line and the storyline, and then all of a sudden one of the big characters comes out and the writers have just totally scripted like a total curveball, to mix metaphors about what's going to go down.
It really did. And look, for some of the people listening to this podcast, mostly my family who are all Celtic supporters, hello, Stephen Donnelly in Dubai, he'll get this one. It felt like that Celtic Rangers game that when Rangers if they won this game at Celtic Park, they were going to win the league. I think it was like 8 in a row. It was a really hot day. These games are hot, intense rivalry affairs anyway, but this game was particularly, on edge. Celtic got a whole bunch of players sent off early. The referee got hit by a coin from the crowd and there's blood pissing out of his head. A fan fell from the top level to the bottom level. It got stretched away. The game had to get stopped. Paul Lambert lost his teeth in a tackle. Like, it was just, I remember looking at my brother going, this is out of hand. This is out of control. And that's the exact feeling I had within the first 5 minutes of this debate yesterday. I just turned to my partner and said, this is unraveling. This is completely unraveling. Trump does not, this is deliberate. Trump does not want to have a debate.
What time of day were you watching it?
Well, I watched it, it aired at 11 o'clock, Melbourne time, Sydney time, Brisbane time. But I had some work stuff so I couldn't watch it live. So I ended up watching it maybe like an hour and a half on delay. But
good. So at least you were just past noon, so you could drink when it was happening.
I looked at my liquor cabinet and went, yeah, I can do this right now. Like, it was insane. It was insane. It was like me in my 20s having an argument with some obnoxious Tory young lib in a pub, in which it turns into a shouting match, and then all of my friends who are standing around me slowly just move away to the other side of the bar because they want to distance themselves from this insanity. That's what it felt like. But I'd say that in not to try and disparage Joe Biden, because I don't think he wasn't a part of this insanity. This train wreck wasn't a part. Joe Biden was not a part of it. He happened to just be in the same room. It was all Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. It's ridiculous. I think that, I think your pub analogy is certainly evocative of how last night went, but there are real world consequences for the United States, unfortunately. One is that it's a stress test for our democracy. So I think we're going to learn here pretty soon whether our institutions can withstand this level of assault on them. And, as a country, when we look back on this in, 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, we are not going to be defined by the fact that this happened. I think we're going to be defined by sort of like how we respond to it. And, I got to say that the early results, as with everything in the Trump era, are disconcerting, to say the least. I think that's especially true with the GOP's refusal to condemn Trump's inability to disavow white supremacy and its centrality to his support. And I think it's also disappointing to see the fact that our media sort of treated this with some both-sidism that, I think you made the correct point that Joe Biden wasn't necessarily the reason, party to this insanity, but the fact that he was there had other people, he was sort of held up as an equivalent offender in a lot of the early presentations. And what was interesting is like after the way that these debates work is, all of the campaigns and the party apparatuses come out and they try and quote unquote spin the narrative to their favor. Right. Mm-hmm. And, this is a whole like part of the show and dance of politics and the theater of it. And what was interesting last night is that you had all of these like cable news people, especially I saw it on CNN for a bit, were on there, I think programmed going into it that, okay, we're going to have to like discuss like who won and who lost. And they were sort of like, first of all, they were mortified by what happened. And they were also appropriately speechless, I think, initially, as for what we saw. Fox News was kind of the flip side of that. And, they had Karl Rove on there trying to spin it, saying that Trump did well. And, Hugh Hewitt was on Twitter all day saying that, Trump was strong. And then you have people like Frank Luntz, who is a, very well-known pollster, a Republican pollster, who, I think is like, he is part of like this whole political system that is trying to treat 2020 and like the phenomenon of Trump with yesterday's sort of analytical processes, with yesterday's insights. And the rules have just like totally changed. And I don't even know exactly what those rules are, but, it was sad. It was just really bad.
Yeah, the unorthodoxy of 2020, I'll expand that. The unorthodoxy of the Trump presidency has got everyone a bit dumbstruck. And I don't think...
Yeah. There's people who are trying to, like, do what they've always done, like Frank Luntz, to continue using him as an example. One of his things that's quite entertaining, actually, is he'll get, like, a room of undecided voters together, and he'll, like, do a focus group in real time. And, that's part of the, like, who won, who lost gamesmanship of politics. But, I don't understand, like, how you can really, like, use that frame of reference after going through an event like that. Mm. I think you just need to stop and just be like, have an honest conversation with the people in that room, be like, that was terrible. Is this what you want?
I did see the Frank Luntz focus group summary, and even still, it wasn't great for the president. And I've always been a little bit suspicious of this thing that he does at the debates. Are these people truly undecided? I'm always super suspicious about this, but nonetheless, let's pretend that they were. The majority of the people in that room were their one-word answers on Vice President Biden. Was he did surprisingly well. He was presidential. He was considered. He seemed down to earth. He he felt like they said he felt like he was speaking directly to us. And then the remarks about Donald Trump were, obnoxious, arrogant, unhinged, train wreck, shit show, all that kind of stuff. So even what could normally be a stacked room didn't come out well for Trump. Which we can take a bit of hope from even something like that. Let's turn specifically to... Actually, no, one more question, because you really was... I just want to pick up on some of the remarks you just said there before, because you're sort of looking at a bigger picture and the implications it has for the United States going forward. Someone remarked on Twitter that in 1960, when John F. Kennedy debated Richard Nixon in the first televised presidential debate, and Richard Nixon sweated a lot, and we've still been talking about it ever since. Like this was a big thing, you know. I do a periodical kind of lecture at Melbourne Uni about political campaigns. Even I reference it. I talk about this as being a historic moment in modern political campaign communication. And Richard Nixon sweat a lot. We're still talking about it. All he did was sweat. 50 years from now, what are people going to be talking about in terms of this debate? Like this was insane.
It was insane. But I don't think people are going to be talking about it the way they were with Richard Nixon. I think that there's a fundamental difference between that era and political communication and now. What defined Richard Nixon's era, specifically in the 1960 election, was the fact that the avenues for communication with voters were so concentrated. So there was only a few mediums that you could use to get out and in touch with voters. And the use of television to connect with voters on a national scale was that was a first really at that time. And because the methods of communication and outreach were so concentrated, that means that sort of the news cycles didn't move as quickly as they did, as they do now. But with everyone drinking from a fire hose of content every single day, from the time that they get up to the time that they go to sleep, Donald Trump is able to sort of hide in plain sight. And he is able to do things that are totally ridiculous, unacceptable, and increasingly immoral, and sort of get away with it. And that's sort of where we are now. I think people are absolutely becoming fatigued by it. People will talk about the overall assault on democracy in the United States and the way that the president purposefully and deliberately undermined American democracy. That will be what Donald Trump is known for. That will be what this election is known for. And that will be his equivalent to Richard Nixon's sweating moment.
Let's dive into the debate itself, and let's talk about starting with Trump's performance. Do you think that Trump approached this debate differently than 4 years ago when he wasn't president? He was just a challenger when he was debating Hillary Clinton. Do you think that he was more unhinged in this particular debate? Because I remember watching all the debates against Hillary, particularly the one where they were allowed to roam. Do you remember that one where you could walk around a bit? And it just felt like he was...
that's going to be that format. The town hall format is going to be the next debate.
Right. It felt like he was almost stalking her around in a sort of a kind of a quasi-aggressive bullying type. That was the thing that stood out for me in that particular debate 4 years ago. But this time around, my thoughts are he's been in charge for 4 years. He's more arrogant. He's been in a bubble. He knocks off anyone that disagrees with him. He's gone through bloody chiefs of staff like Jack Nicholson goes through golf clubs. He's surrounded by yes men. He's an autocrat, basically. And so it seemed like he was pissed off that he even had to do this debate in the first place. And so there was a new level of arrogance that he brought to this debate compared to 4 years ago. How do you compare in comparison these two debates?
I don't think Trump has changed at all. In his performance last night and the performance of 2016, really. I mean, he was just as abrasive in 2016 as he is now. I think what is different is that the novelty of Trump's spectacle has worn off. He's not new anymore. Whereas I think when 2016 was happening, people were, thought it was a spectacle, and maybe even there was an entertainment factor for some involved. This time, I think people are aghast at the fact that he defines us. The second thing is that unlike in 2016, Trump does not benefit from broad-based antipathy towards his opponent. Hillary Clinton was deeply unpopular in a way that Joe Biden just isn't. And that allowed him to sort of skate by a little bit. But, he didn't, 4 years ago, Trump didn't necessarily need any plans because his plan was that he was going to, quote unquote, burn it all down. His plan was his status as an outsider. It's hard to keep that shtick up after 4 years in charge. So I think maybe he realized that he had to sort of amp up his spectacle to have any chance of getting through this in a way that would be beneficial to him. And the only way it's going to be beneficial to him, he's not winning voters over in this event. No one's going to Donald Trump after the last 4 years and saying, sign me up, this is great. But I think he wanted to try and make people not vote for Biden, rattle him, show people that he is, senile, over the hill, can't handle it. And to that extent, I don't think he succeeded.
The two major talking points to come out of it, the first one I want to get your thoughts on is the moment when Chris Wallace, the moderator from Fox News, asked Donald Trump to denounce white supremacy. It was quite a funny moment there, because when he asked him that question, and Joe Biden sort of said to him, yeah, well, will you do it as well? And there was this there was silence for literally the first time. There was like 3 or 4 seconds silence, which felt like a minute. And he's like, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And they put him on it. So I think Biden threw in, he mentioned the Proud Boys, which is this white supremacy, anti-minority, anti-Semitic, misogynistic, racial hate group, basically the political equivalent of the Rangers Football Club. And he tells him to stand back and stand by. This is huge. What were your thoughts when you first heard that?
Well, it's interesting, Stephen. I sort of missed it in real time because it was so chaotic, that this particular moment. And there's a lot of shouting and crosstalk that made it sort of hard to catch on to the fact that the president of the United States not only refused to condemn white supremacy, but he openly embraced a white supremacist group. And it was only after, I think that my experience was fairly common in terms of the way that I consumed the aftermath of the coverage. I think that's one of those stories that actually filtered up to the top, and it wasn't necessarily something that was immediately definitive of the debate, right afterwards. Because, I got a notification from the New York Times after the debate was over saying, Biden called Trump a clown. And I was just like, what? How are they missing this white supremacy thing? But then this morning, the white supremacy story had begun to sort of become one of the most definitive moments of the debate.
You shouldn't feel bad about yourself that you missed it, because Biden missed it as well. The minute Trump said to the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, instead of either Wallace or Biden saying, hang on a minute, we just asked you to denounce white supremacy, and you're telling a particular group just to stand by, just to hold your horses, just wait on the sidelines for 20 minutes. They never went back on that. And Biden went on and started talking about the FBI and a whole bunch of investigations, which then Trump tried to flip back into Antifa, and away we went, more sort of chaos, and it just passed everyone by.
Well, I think Biden gets credit for making that faux pas that happen, because he's the one who threw out Proud Boys. And, Trump walked right into that trap. So, I mean, yeah, I guess, he didn't sort of deliberate on it. But the fact that he made it happen, I think, is strategically, to his advantage. It feels even dirty, saying that, because it's fucking racism and white supremacy, and I just don't think that should factor in sort of a win-loss calculus of a political moment, but here we are.
I mean, the Proud Boys have been banned from Twitter and Facebook. You're doing something wrong when you're getting banned from Twitter and Facebook.
Well, I think that we could do a whole nother episode on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And as an organization, yes, they're banned, but their message still gets out.
Donald Trump just did it for them. No one's
Yeah,
no one had even
exactly.
heard of him until this friggin' debate, and all of a sudden the whole bloody world knows about
A
him.
lot of people have not heard of them. So yeah, that was insane.
Second one to come out, for me anyway, the second big sort of thing to come out of the debate was Trump said it at the start, and then he really doubled down at the end, and that was basically calling the democratic process, the election process, and the balloting as both rigged, a fraud, and a sham. So not even just talking about the mail-in ballots, as you call them in the United States and Australia, we call them postal votes, but the entire electoral process as being rigged. And
not only that, he refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. He refused to accept the outcome of the election, and then sowed distrust in the election by claiming that it's rigged and full of fraud.
Why is this more significant that this happened in a debate as opposed to him just constantly saying it either on Fox and Friends or at his rallies?
I would sort of dispute the premise of that question. I don't necessarily know that the fact that it happened at the debate makes it more significant than any other time he's uttered it. I think the fact that the President of the United States and the most powerful person in the world and our country and all of representative democracies says that America's election is full of fraud and is rigged. I brought this up in previous conversations that we've had, and we as a country just don't know how to process this. We have never, ever, ever really had to the last time we've had to come close to dealing with something like this was in the 1870s in Reconstruction. And there's just no frame of reference for the president of the United States undermining the credibility of our democracy and the outcome of an election. But beyond that, he's also wielding the power of his government to delegitimize it. Things like messing with the post office, using the Justice Department to push a false narrative of fraudulent ballots, cherry picking stories and facts to paint a picture of fraud that frankly doesn't exist. I think to the extent that, the fact that it did happen in a debate, as opposed to necessarily like one of his rallies or on Twitter or on Fox and Friends, is the fact that the debate is an unmistakably presidential setting. And this is one of the moments that has a maximum attention on the institution of the presidency from the people of this country, from voters. Not necessarily just the president, but people are thinking about this institution and checking in mentally to the fact that we're going to be perpetuating this for another 4 years on top of the 200 plus that's already been going on. And so I think that, a lot of people just don't have a frame of reference to be able to process that.
Do you want to...
it's insane.
Yeah, completely. And the fact that he's also then he's basically saying that the outcome will need to be decided in the Supreme Court. A Supreme Court that he's currently trying to pack by getting Amy Coney Barrett onto that bench in record time. So it's then got a 6-3.
He finally nominated. I can't believe he nominated someone whose initial stand for all cops are bastards.
I did not. I wouldn't have picked that up there. Thank you, Sam. Should we talk about the what's going on right now in terms of voting habits of Americans, or do you want to talk about that a bit later on in terms of absentee voting?
Yeah, you're the boss here. It's your show, it's your podcast.
Let's do that.
All right.
No, actually, no, wait, let's not do that. Let's come back to that. Let's flip and talk. Any other comments about Trump's performance before we then go and have a look at Joe Biden?
you know what? Here's the thing. What is there to say? He's a racist piece of shit. Who debased himself, and he debased our country last night. There's not much else to say.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, I will say, I think, I don't think he won any votes last night, for sure. Did Biden win any votes? Hard to say. But here's what I will say. I don't think Biden lost any necessarily. I think what he needed to do was go in there show himself to be presidential, have people sort of realize that there is a path out of this nightmare, that we don't have to have it be this bad. And he had to also prove to people that, he's not sort of this guy, this old man with dementia whose time has come and gone, as Trump has been trying to portray him. And I think he effectively did that. What Trump did is, I think he motivated people to wake up today and go and vote against him. And that is significant, because it's never good to, if you're a politician, to motivate people to go and vote against you. He gave people a great reason to do that today.
If you're Joe Biden, you're 5 minutes into this debate, and it's quite clear that the rules of this debate have been thrown out the window by your opponent, and you now need to strategize in the white heat of the moment. You're on national television. There are millions of people watching this debate. The glare and the heat of the spotlight is firmly on you. In your mind, you're thinking about the strategy that you discussed with your team beforehand, and then now you realize that the strategy and the lines that you want to, try and bring in are it's going to be hard for you to do that, because you have this moron 3 feet away from you just talking over you constantly.
More than 6 feet. Come on, social distancing.
That's right. Yeah. I feel like you're at a mentally, the strategy in your head must be either, one, if I'm Joe Biden, do I, use the old adage and never interrupt your opponent while he's making a mistake, and just shut up and just try to look like the sane adult in the room?
Well, you can't do that, because you don't want to be viewed as someone who gets pushed around.
Correct. Yes. And then the flip side is, no, do I need to engage in some of this insanity? But the downside to that is I'm going to get dragged down to his level, which is what he's actually trying to do here. This is a tough call to make right there and then. There's no timeouts. There's no going back to the board and going, right, how do we go and how do we make adjustments here, team?
Well, I think he did a good job of not letting Trump get away with lies. Biden was like, that's not true, that's a lie, ad nauseum. Every sort of falsehood that Trump threw out there, Biden sort of met that with, it's not true. I also thought that Biden did a really good job of walking that fine line and not letting himself get pushed around, but also not taking the bait. He sort of, he did give some back, but people aren't walking away from it being like, Biden is the problem here.
Yeah.
So I think he did a good job of sort of like walking that line. And I think that shows that he was prepared for this behavior.
Yeah, it's hard to, I'm just trying to recall some of the strong points that Biden had throughout the debate, or even using the term debate, I feel fraudulent, because it was so hard for him to get. It was hard for him to get any clean air to land any kind of good lines. But what ones for you stood out that you sort of thought, that's good?
There were no lines that really sort of like stood out, last night. Rarely are debates defined by killer lines. They're defined by like killer moments, right? And for Biden, his winning moments last night were when he was able to sort of talk straight to the camera and break through the fourth wall of that shitty reality TV show last night, and sort of empathize with people, especially on things like the coronavirus and healthcare. I think he did a really good job of bringing it back to the voters. The second point that really stood out to me was when Trump was going after Biden's son, Hunter, for having a drug problem, which, is despicable. And Biden answered it in a way that I think just showed profound grace and leadership, and said, like many of you, my son has had a problem with drugs, but he worked at it, he beat it, and I'm very proud of him and I love him. I think that really stood out to people, if it didn't get overshadowed by the chaos and the crosstalk of the moment, like that Proud Boys moment. And
moments before that as well, when Biden recalled the pride that he had in his son, Beau, who served in the military in the Middle East.
Yeah, and the way that Trump just totally dismissed that was, I mean, it's just, dude, it's so crazy.
Yeah.
We're talking about like one of the most vile people on the planet.
And you're right. The moments when he could manage to talk down the barrel of the camera and try and have a direct conversation with the American people and frame the conversation from the view of the American people, framing him to be the protagonist with the American people, that sort of story of us that we talk about a lot, I thought were some of his strongest moments, which was not easy to do. It's also funny to watch the way that the two candidates were positioned and the way that they looked at each other. Trump constantly talked at Biden. Biden never or rarely looked at Trump, and he was either trying to talk down the camera or he was looking at Chris Wallace going, mate, help me out here. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I think Biden definitely benefits from experience and sophistication when it comes to politicking in a way that Trump just never will.
Any other thoughts on Biden before I want to switch the conversation to the format and in particular Chris Wallace?
Well, I mean, look, if you're Biden's campaign, I think you have to be thinking that last night was a good outcome for the prospects of your election. You know, walking away from it, the campaign raised like $10 million right off the bat.
In an hour.
Which it was insane. I think that that shows that a lot of people are motivated to just get rid of Trump and end this. So that was good. And then the fact that Biden, I think, to the extent that people are going to be talking about him, I think a lot of people are going to be talking about the fact if they can get past sort of the both sidism inclinations, people are going to be talking about his ability to empathize with people at home, break through that way. And I think they're going to be talking about that moment where he embraced his son, Hunter, especially.
Probably one other thought I've got on it, or maybe this is probably actually worthwhile talking about in terms of the format. But I just did find that, and I think Trump knows this, he doesn't want to have a debate on the technical details of public policy. And to be fair,
he doesn't know any.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And I was about to say, to be fair, I'm not a policy wonk, so I don't want to hear too much of that either. But I would like to see some modicum of discussion about policy and how what your plans are for the future. At no stage did Trump ever outline what he was going to do for the American people in the next 4 years. And at no stage did the debate ever get to be in that situation. And I think that was quite masterful by Trump, really, to manage that in a way, like managing the clock in the final 10 minutes of a football game.
I think Trump can't allow it to get to a space where people talk about the future with him because he has no plan. He has no interest in that. What he's trying to do is just get to the election and win. And he just knows that his chances of that are very slim.
Go back and read the transcript of Trump's answer to the question.
No, I don't want to do that.
Well, if you're looking for a laugh, go back and read the transcript of Trump's answer to the question about, do you believe that climate change is man-made?
In Life After Love?
Yeah. Very good. And it's frontier gibberish. He's talking about the price of cars and gas guzzlers from 10 years ago. It is some of the sentences don't even make any sense. It's a perfect opportunity to drop in that line from Billy Madison at the end where the guy talks about that was complete nonsense and we're all dumber for the experience. I can't remember what it is, but others would. It was just bizarre. And that was the closest he got to talking about policy. And it was just absolute nonsense. Speaking of nonsense, the format and Chris Wallace, I wanted to share my thoughts first to kick it off and then get your take on it. And I know that we were texting a bit yesterday about it. I think you're a little bit kinder, certainly in the heat of the moment. Maybe you might have softened your view on it. And to be fair, when I wrote my notes on this was last night, Melbourne time, and I was still livid at it. So maybe I probably softened a bit after reading some of the reports today. But first of all, the questions that were drafted by Chris Wallace, well, he says he drafted them, but I'm sure it was a whole team of researchers at Fox News, I thought were terrible. There were questions that appeased to sort of the white grievances of Fox News watchers. Basically, we had 10 seconds on COVID, 10 seconds on Trump's poor response to it, 10 seconds on Trump's taxes. Obviously not 10 seconds, but I'm just trying to imply that it wasn't very long at all. And then heaps of time on on weird aspects of race riots and Hunter Biden and the validity of the election itself, are elevating something that is just absolutely not grounded in any fact or evidence, and elevating that to a long debate. I just sort of thought, we've set this up for Trump to talk about all the things that pisses him off anyway. Like the C-SPAN's got the next debate, and then NBC's got one after that. They've got to bring the format back into topics that certainly would appeal to middle America. If they're going to sit down and watch the next debate, they're going to want to hear the two candidates talk about what their plans are for the future. These questions were not set up to do that in the first place.
Yeah. Before we get on the questions, no moderator was going to be able to keep last night on track. I don't think. Trump was coming out there and was going to do what he was going to do, regardless of, Mother Teresa was moderating it. And Trump was hell bent on his pugnacious interruption strategy. But at the end of the day, I think you cannot escape the fact that Chris Wallace is a journalist who works for a news organization that is actively trying to aid Trump's reelection and basically serves as a propaganda arm for his administration. Like that, he just can't separate himself from that fact. And we saw that play out in the conversations and the topics that were chosen for the debate. Now, a lot of the questions were ridiculous, especially on the law and order topic, which is itself a dog whistle. Race and violence in cities, another dog whistle. And I thought that, Trump made the calculation himself to go after Biden's family the way that he did. And Chris Wallace should have done more to knock that off. Although, again, like what can any person do, I think that if we're going to be sort of like objective of this to the extent that we can be, he does get marks for asking about Trump's tax returns. That he asked about those right away, or early on rather. And he did also ask about climate change, though not in a very substantive or edifying way for the viewers. But he does get marks for that because it originally was not part of the debate and was source of a lot of uproar. And he got that feedback and realized he needed to include it. But bungled it. And you could tell that that was something that was crammed in there and was not something he was necessarily prepared for. So, look, I think the big takeaway from Chris Wallace is that it's never good if the moderator becomes the story or a storyline. And he did.
And reading there's an article in the New York Times today. He's given an interview, and it's his sort of 24 hours after reflections. And he, to that point that you just said there, Sam, he set out at the start. He said, "I didn't want to insert myself in the debate. I wanted to let the two men talk." So he said that when Trump first started to interject on Biden's earlier first 2 minutes, he thought, "Oh, this is good. We're going to have a debate. Here we go. This is going to be great television." And he said he took too long to realize that, oh, wait, Donald Trump's going to do this for the next 90 minutes. And I think my criticism of Wallace was he should have picked up on that earlier. I mean, he did try to bring it back.
It's naive.
Yeah.
Like ridiculous.
Him trying to basically bring Trump back on track midway through the debate was 45 minutes too late. Like, he should have nipped that in the bud after the second time he interjected.
He benefits from this reputation of being like a serious journalist and the redeeming journalist of Fox News, that I think just because he asked Republicans follow-up questions doesn't make him necessarily like a serious journalist. And so I think people should be more honest with themselves about evaluating his stature as a journalist.
Yeah,
especially in the Washington press corps. I will say that it was interesting to see after the debate, Jake Tapper criticized Chris Wallace directly. It's very rare for one journalist to criticize another, especially in sort of the Washington infotainment circle of journalists. And it's also rare for someone who's a bit younger, as Jake Tapper is, to criticize someone who is older in the Washington press corps, as he did. And so that was notable to me.
As a friend who's worked in Australian politics, particularly in the media industry, remarked Chris Wallace would make a great Fairfax journalist in Australia because he's easily bullied by conservatives. And I think that's my takeaway from Chris Wallace's performance. But I will say this, when he left the debate and went to the airport in Cleveland to fly home, Lachlan Murdoch met him there with a glass of champagne and congratulated him on what a marvellous thing it was for Fox News that evening. So there you go. There's a takeaway for you.
Yeah.
They got what they wanted. They got what they wanted.
They always do.
The outcome. Any thoughts on? I mean, you've sort of touched on it a little bit, this is probably an opportunity now to talk a bit more about the race itself and where this debate fits within the broader campaign cycle. Focus groups all year have said that particularly suburban white voters, are fatigued by the chaos and drama of the Trump administration, and that's basically what they got from Donald Trump for 90 minutes last night in that debate. And on this basis alone, if you're the Biden camp, you're feeling reasonably confident, particularly given that all the polls, and I'm talking about state-based battleground seat polls, are indicating that Biden has a reasonably good lead. It was Trump had to peel votes off, and last night rather, he didn't do that.
No, he didn't do that, and he also motivated people to vote against him. So. Practically speaking, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of what the outcome of this debate means. So already 28 million ballots have been requested in 29 states, which is 14% of all registered voters. Beyond there, what we're seeing is that absentee ballots been sent automatically to 21% of registered voters. So that's 44 million ballots in 10 states and DC that are just sent automatically. Voting is happening right now. Already 1 million votes have been registered. And when we look at the absentee ballot requests compared to 2016, the requests for absentee ballots, so postal votes basically, have increased in the state of Florida by 155%, in Michigan 218%, in Pennsylvania, which is probably one of the states that we call a tipping point state, which can end the election. Requests for postal votes there has increased by over 2,000% compared to 2016. Ohio is 153%. Georgia is 568%. Wisconsin is 674%. North Carolina is 468%. So the reason why those numbers matter is because there is a strong interest to vote right now. And there are people who probably have these ballots sitting at home. And after watching that vote last night, watching that debate last night, are able to go and fill them out and return them. I tried to find numbers on how many people voted, how many votes were counted today. I couldn't find those, but the fact that there is such a strong interest in voting, especially by mail, means that as Joe Biden is able to bank these votes, that means there's less votes that he has to turn out closer to election day. And the party breakdown for all of those requested votes breaks significantly to the Democrat Party's advantage. So in the state of Pennsylvania, where absentee voter requests have increased 2,000% over 2016, 66% of those are for Democrats. So I think that when you look at the fact that Joe Biden was able to raise $10 million in 1 hour last night, immediately after the debate, and then you think about all of the ballots that are sitting there at home right now or are on their way, Joe Biden was able to bank a lot of votes and get those in his column today, which I think is a very significant outcome.
Yeah, those stats that you've just read out there are huge. If anyone wants to look at them, you can find them on the New York Times website. But it's incredible that this increase in absentee ballots from 2016. I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, I think that because of COVID, this is just a smart thing to do in terms of enfranchising the electorate, but also the break in favour of the Democrats is an interesting term because historically speaking, absentee ballots have always favoured Republicans. It's something that they've prided themselves in their campaign machine in terms of getting particularly military servicemen and women that are overseas to vote and other
Well, here's the other thing.
Other operations.
Here's how this increase in postal voting is going to play out. What's interesting is that these votes are counted, but typically they're not counted until after the votes that are cast on election day. So what you're going to have, or what you very well could have, is an outcome where on election night, it looks like Donald Trump is ahead, but because you're not necessarily, these states can't count these ballots until after the election, there's going to be this huge shift in terms of the margin of victory. And when you brought up Donald Trump's undermining of the election, this is where it becomes so important, because there is active and like a key GOP strategy is to dispute the outcome of this postal vote so that it causes disarray and distrust in the outcome, even if the outcome is totally clear. If you want to freak out, I highly recommend reading the article, "The Election That Could Break America," in The Atlantic.
There you go. And I'm with you. I mean, I'm sweating on that. Like, I'm worried about election night. I'm really worried about election night because of exactly what you've just said, that scenario. And it's really incumbent upon all of the news outlets to not start calling races. And they'll want to, because it's a news outlet. They'll want to be able to present news. And I know there's always a competition between all the majors networks to be the first to call particular states. But their data teams are going to have to just hold fire, because they'll know full well that there will be an absolute truckload of votes that will be in boxes waiting to be counted because they're absentee ballots. And they're just going to have to learn to just hold their fire before they start making calls, because Trump will jump on that. And everyone will be looking at Fox News, because they'll be the ones that want to start calling races when there's probably still 40% of votes yet to be counted.
It's going to be crazy.
The other thing I wanted to just sort of draw your attention to, if we're going to sort of start nerding out a bit on data before we wrap up, is the snapshot of the current polling averages. And there's Nate Cohn has been tracking all the state-based polls and averaging them out for a couple of months now. And the ones that he's focusing on are primarily, obviously, all the sort of the key battleground states. And he's done it in 3 columns. He's done who is currently the candidate that is leading in the averages in the polling, that just as a straight up number. The second column he's looking at is same battleground states, but if those polls were as wrong as they were in 2014, and he's factoring in the fact that in 2016, and by saying, he's saying that if they were as wrong as they were in 2016, that is that they were overweighted with college-educated voters, therefore undersampling likely Republican voters. And then he's also doing it as if they were as wrong as they were in 2012. And it's an interesting stat, because I've been following it now for about a month. And Biden has been leading in the 2020 polling averages across all of the states. This is Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Ohio, North Carolina, Iowa, Florida. He's been leading in all of those except for Georgia and Texas. We'll point out some of them are within the margin of error in terms of the averages, but those would include Florida, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona. But the ones that are not within the margin of error, so sort of 4 or 5 points higher or 4 or 5 points more to Biden, it's Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, New Hampshire, Minnesota. That alone gets him enough college votes. However,
think about.
Hang on, before you get to, just hear me out. However, so the 2016 polls, he's taken the same polling, but said if we were as wrong as we were in 2016, the Biden still wins Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona. Doesn't win Wisconsin, Ohio, North Carolina, Iowa, Florida, Georgia, Texas. However, that still gives him 280 electoral college votes. So even if they get it as wrong as they did in 2016, he just does narrowly win. And that second column I'm talking about, that 2016 column, Biden has not been leading in that up until 2 days ago. That most recent poll in Pennsylvania that came out, which was it the NBC Marist poll? I can't remember, but had Biden up by 8 points. That has tipped the scale. It's interesting to watch. And also just coupled with the remarks that you've just made about voter turnout, absentee ballot requests in Pennsylvania, and the tipping point that is Pennsylvania in this race. If he wins Pennsylvania, it's so much harder for Trump to get to 270. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when you look at the polling and you overlay that on top of the fact that already 1 million votes have been cast, and there's such an advantage in the turnout game for Democrats this year, Trump is in really bad shape. And the only way that he can plausibly win this election is with some real chicanery and real morally corrupt tactics around the dispute of mail-in votes. So the polling is what it is. Biden is clearly ahead, but who knows what can happen as we head into the final stretch.
And the final stretch we are heading into, there is 34 days to go until Election Day. As we all know, people are currently voting, so we really are, it is Election Day now, all the way to the first Tuesday in November. Final thoughts, Sam, before we wrap up?
My final thoughts are that it's going to be a wild ride. And, we're going to, if you thought that was crazy, just wait. There's going to be a few more crazy events that are going to transpire. I mean, the fact that we're not even talking about Trump's tax returns anymore is itself, I think, a sign of how warped the news cycle is. And I would also say that the next debate is going to be very much worth watching because it's going to be a town hall format. And Trump is going to have to speak directly to voters. And I think for people looking for signs of hope, they will see a man totally out of his depth and on his last legs.
And also, just to note, next Wednesday, US time, next Thursday, Australian time, is the VEP, the vice presidential debate between the Democratic vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris and the vice president of the United States, Mike Pence, and his wife, because I'm assuming she'll sit right beside him whilst they do that debate because he can't be in a room with another woman. That'll be interesting to watch. Never done that before in a debate, so that's going to be interesting to take in. I wonder if she's got any thoughts on some of the topics that they'll raise. Sam, thanks very much for once again coming on the show. We're almost there. I think we've got you coming back on the week before Election Day just to do our final preview. We've been doing this now since I think October last year. It's been a journey and we're in the home stretch. And to anyone who's out there who is listening to the show who lives in the United States, because I think 20% of the audience are US based, if you haven't voted, go vote. If you haven't register to vote. If you have voted, go and make calls. As someone tweeted yesterday, if you can spend 2 hours watching the debate, you can spend two hours making calls for your Democratic candidate. Go and get involved in this campaign. There is so much at stake. Sam, thanks very much for coming on today.
Thank you.
And I'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Godspeed. Good luck to everybody down in Melbourne. Hang in there.
Bless you.